Hi, friends. Got the last couple pages of Ramona. Next week on Monday, we'll start a new read aloud. Hopefully, you'll listen along. So, away we go. So, I'll review our last paragraph. That evening, her father said, I miss my little girl's smiles. Ramona managed a tight lipped smile that did not show the gap in her teeth. Later, she heard her father say something to her mom about, This nonsense has gone on long enough. And her mother answered with something about, Well, dear, Ramona has to make up her own mind that she wants to behave herself. Ramona despaired. Nobody understood. She wanted to behave herself, except when banging her heels on the bedroom wall. She'd always wanted to behave herself. Why couldn't people understand how she felt? She had only touched Susan's hair in the first place because it was so beautiful. And the last time, well, Susan had been so bossy she deserved to have her hair pulled. Ramona soon discovered the children in the neighborhood were fascinated by her predicament. How come you get to stay out of school? They asked. Miss Benny doesn't want me, Ramona answered. Did you have fun in kindergarten today? Mary Jane asked every day, pretending she didn't know Ramona had stayed home. Ramona, who was not fooled for an instant, disdained to answer. Henry Huggins was the one, quite accidentally, who really frightened Ramona. One afternoon, when she was pedaling her lopsided two-wheeled tricycle up and down in front of her house, Henry came riding down the street on his bike, delivering the newspaper. He paused with one foot on the curb in front of the Quimby's house while he rolled the newspaper up. Hi, said Henry. It's quite a trike you're riding. This isn't a trike. This is my two-wheeler, Ramona said with dignity. Henry grinned and tossed the paper onto the Quimby's front steps. How come the truant officer doesn't make you go to school? He asked. What's a truant officer? Asked Ramona. It's a guy who gets after the kids who don't go to school, was Henry's careless answer as he pedaled off down the street. A truant officer, Ramona decided, must be something like the dog catcher who sometimes came to Glenwood School when there were too many dogs on the playground. He tried to lasso the dogs, and once, when he did manage to catch an elderly, overweight basset hound, he put the dog in the back of his truck and drove away with it. Ramona didn't want any truant officer to catch her and drive away with her, so she put her lopsided two-wheeled tricycle into the garage and went into the house and stayed there, looking out from behind the curtain at the other kids and poking her tongue into the space where her tooth used to be. Ramona, why do you keep making such faces? Asked Mrs. Quimby in that tired voice she had been using the last day or so. Ramona took her tongue out of the space. I'm not making faces, she said. Pretty soon her grown-up tooth would come in without the tooth fairy paying a visit, and no one would ever know that she had lost a tooth. She wondered what Miss Binny had done with her tooth. Thrown it away, most likely. The next morning, Ramona continued to draw rows of 3 pictures, circle 2, and cross out 1, but the morning was long and lonely. Ramona was so lonely she even considered going back to kindergarten. But then she thought about Miss Binny, who did not like her anymore, and who might not be glad to see her. She decided she would have to wait much, much longer for Miss Binny to forgive her. When do you think Miss Binny will forgive me, or forget me? Ramona asked her mother. Mrs. Quimby kissed the top of Ramona's head. Oh dear, I doubt she'll ever forget you, she said. Not ever, not as long as she lives. The situation was hopeless. That noon, Ramona was not at all hungry when she sat down to some soup, a sandwich, and some carrot sticks. She bit into a carrot stick, but somehow chewing it took a long time. She stopped chewing altogether when she heard the doorbell ring. Her heart began to thump. Maybe the truant officer had finally come to get her and carry her off in the back of his truck. Maybe she should run and hide. "Why, Howie!" Ramona heard her mother say. Feeling she had had a close call, she went on chewing away at the carrot stick. She was safe. It was only Howie. "Come on in, Howie," said Mrs. Quimby. "Ramona is having her lunch. Would you like to stay for some soup and a sandwich? I can call your mom and ask if it's all right." Ramona hoped Howie would stay. She was that lonely. "Oh, I just brought a letter for Ramona." Ramona jumped up from the table. "A letter for me? Who's it from?" Here was the first interesting thing that had happened in days. Gee, I don't know," said Howie. "Miss Binny told me to give it to you." Ramona snatched the envelope from Howie, and sure enough, there was Ramona printed on the envelope. And here is, oh, Claire, be gone. There's Howie with his letter. "Let me read it to you," said Miss Quimby. "It's my letter," said Ramona, and tore open the envelope. When she pulled out the letter, two things caught her eyes at once. Her tooth scotch-taped to the top of the paper, and the first line, which Ramona could read because she knew how all the letters began, "Dear Ramona Q," was followed by 2 lines of printing, which Ramona could not read. "Mama!" cried Ramona, filled with joy. Miss Binny had not thrown away her tooth, and Miss Binny had drawn ears and whiskers on her Q. The teacher liked the way Ramona made Q, so she must like Ramona too. There was some hope after all. "Why, Ramona!" Mrs. Quimby was astonished. "You've lost a tooth. When did that happen?" "At school," said Ramona, "and here it is." She waved the letter at her mom, and then she studied it carefully, because she wanted so much to be able to read Miss Binny's words herself. It says, "Dear Ramona Q, here's your tooth. I hope the tooth fairy brings you $1. I miss you and I want you to come back to kindergarten. Love and kisses, Miss Binny." Miss Quimby smiled and held out her hand. "Dear, why don't you let me read the letter?" Ramona handed over the letter. Maybe the words did not say exactly what she had pretended to read, but she was sure they must mean the same. "Dear Ramona Q," began Mrs. Quimby, and she remarked, "Why, Ramona, she makes her Q the same way as you do, with the ears and whiskers." "Go on, Mama," urged Ramona, eager to hear what the letter really said. Mrs. Quimby read, I am sorry I forgot to give you your tooth, but I'm sure the tooth fairy will understand. When are you coming back to kindergarten?" Ramona didn't care if the tooth fairy understood or not. Miss Binny understood, and nothing else mattered. "Tomorrow, Mama!" she cried. "I'm going to kindergarten tomorrow." "Good girl," said Mrs. Quimby, and hugged Ramona. "She can't," said matter-of-fact Howie. "She can't 'cause tomorrow's Saturday and the school is closed." Ramona gave Howie a look of pity, but she said, "Please stay for lunch, Howie. It isn't tuna fish, it's peanut butter and jelly." And here is Ramona with her letter, jumping up and down. She's so happy. And that is the end of Ramona the Pest. And next week I will start Henry Huggins, who was a character. He was the crossing guard. And we'll go back and read Henry Huggins and find out how he came to get his dog, Ribsy. So I hope you have a wonderful weekend, and I'll see you next week.